This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media interview. Not many people have managed to land the words Nazi and funny in the same sentence. Charlie Chaplin did it in The Great Dictator. Mel Brooks did it in The Producers with the song and dance number Springtime for Hitler. And my guest today, the Emmy-nominated Larry Thomas, did it too. He's been an actor for 25 years and is a veteran of dozens of films, TV shows, and hundreds of theater performances. Larry recently finished shooting the film Postal and was seen on Arrested Development, Hot Properties, Threshold, Scrubs, and a Lexus commercial as a crazed, pre-Bugsy visionary selling the idea of Vegas. Last year, Larry completed a 35-city, 140-show production of Neil Simon's The Odd Couple, the female version, starring Barbara Eden. Who the hell is Larry Thomas? No answers for you. Well, not yet, anyway. Be patient, my friends. You're not going to want to miss this interview. Larry, welcome to Mr. Media.
How you doing?
Good, good. Larry, I'm sure a few people recognized your name, but most probably won't. Could you end the suspense and tell Mr. Media listeners and readers the role for which you're most famous?
Well, I guess I could end it by saying, no soup for you, Mr. Media. No interview for you. I played the soup Nazi on Seinfeld.
I think people now know exactly who you are.
It seems to be a phrase that most of the world knows. I actually have been told by many people who I've met that they use the phrase constantly in their lives, and they've never actually seen the episodes. They've actually gotten it like secondhand from somebody else, but they love the way it sounds, so they use it.
Isn't that amazing? Now, do you remember getting the call to audition for that?
I remember it really, really well. It was at a time in my life when I was actually under the threat of being thrown out of my acting class if I didn't get a job, a paying acting job. And I had a certain amount of weeks to get it. And I had worked and worked and worked, done interviews, tried to meet people, dropped off photographs, you know, what they call pounding the pavement. And one night I was actually having dinner with a guy that wanted me to work as a bail bondsman for his company because I was a bail bondsman and I was trying to be more of an actor. And, you know, I got paged and I went to a payphone and my agent said, you know, they called from Seinfeld and want to see you on this on this guest spot. The character's called the Soup Nazi. And I think they want you to work up a Middle Eastern accent. And he said, other than that, there's no scene available on paper or anything, so you're just going to have to go in tomorrow morning and see what they have. So it was kind of mysterious, actually. And
how do you prepare for something like that, then?
Well, you know, you prepare for every audition differently anyway. You know, but the way you prepare is based on what you see on paper, mostly. You know, you want to read the scene and go, okay, this is a comedy, whatever. I need to think this way, or this is very serious. I need to do a little work on this. But in this character, well, in order to get the Middle Eastern accent, the first thing I did was I went home and I took the videotape for Lawrence of Arabia, and I put it in, and I just worked up an impression of Omar Sharif because he has such a beautiful accent. And I thought, well, that's, you know, they can't fault me on that one. And then I just started to think, I was a big fan of Seinfeld since season 3, and my episode was in season 7, so I had 4 years at that point of watching Seinfeld. I knew the characters. I knew how Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer would probably affect a guy called the Soup Nazi. You know, it was so descriptive, the name. So I just worked on that, you know. I was almost completely right on most of it, except for I thought Kramer would be like his worst nightmare. Whereas instead, you know, in the brilliant script by Spike Feresten, he actually had Kramer as only friend, which I thought in the end was like hilarious. So I just worked on it. I called a friend of mine who's a stand-up comedian, a guy named Tom Ayers, and I just was saying, like, you know, wow, you know, I've got this audition for Seinfeld, and he said, well, if they don't have anything on paper tomorrow, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? And I just started ad-libbing things. I said, well, in dealing with George, I'd probably have some kind of a cart or something maybe, and, on the street in New York, and, George would probably come up, and he'd probably try to, get something from nothing, and I would probably say something to him like, you, small fry, get to the end of my line, or no soup. And Tom said, that's great, man, that's great. I love that no soup thing. It actually has a ring to it. And he said, if they do have something written and, throw that in anyway, Well, I didn't need to, because when I got there the next morning, there were 3 of the 6 total scenes were waiting there for me, and no soup for you was like the 3rd line in. So we had actually both thought of the same line, Although Spike didn't so much dream it up as much as heard it, because that's what the real guy that he based the character on in New York, Al Yeager, would say, to people.
Well, I want to come back to Al in a moment.
Okay.
What do you recall? So you obviously you got the job. You auditioned. You got the job. What do you recall about being on the set and playing the character? Was it all laid out? Was it like a Neil Simon moment where every word, everything was laid out, or did it happen a little more improvisationally?
Well, no, I stuck with whatever was written in the script, almost. I did ad-lib one word, which has become a little bit famous, actually, but it was almost accidental. But the script would change a little bit every day anyway, because that's how sitcoms work. No matter how funny you are, like around the table read on the first day, and I've never understood this, but then again, I'm not a sitcom writer or producer, but the next day, it's changed. And even the stuff you thought was really funny is different. I don't know. So they rewrite and they tool it and whatever, and especially on Seinfeld, if you've watched any of those special features about Larry, David, and Jerry, they do a lot of even though they didn't write the original script, they do a lot of the rewrites to make it fit more and more into Seinfeld, into Jerry's mind, or mostly Larry's mind, because this was before he took a break. But I pretty well stuck to the script. I was actually very nervous, to tell you the truth, because it wasn't until after I went to the callback for the audition, which was yet another audition, that I found out that there weren't just 3 scenes, there were 6. And when a guest character has 6 scenes, he's pretty much the guest character of the episode, which I didn't expect. And it was really interesting, because in the callback, I walked in, and this time the first time I just read for a casting associate named Brian Myers. But when I went back, I went to read for Jerry and Larry David and Andy Ackerman and Spike, who wrote it, and some of the other writers were there, like Peter Melman, and, because they were now producers and so forth. And I think George Shapiro, who is Jerry's manager and also one of the executive producers of the show, I think he was there. You'll also know him. He was Andy Kaufman's manager.
Oh.
So Danny DeVito plays him in that movie, Man on the Moon.
Right.
And so he was there. And so there were a lot of guys there. And I went in, and I started to I was a little late, so I actually just, barely cleared the top of the stairs when the casting director grabbed me, Mark Hirschfeld, grabbed me and dragged me into the room and just handed me this stack of paper. And so we went through the first 3 scenes that I had already read, which had changed a little bit. But Jerry Seinfeld was laughing his head off. I mean, so loudly that all I could hear. I had to actually compete vocally to, override his incessant laughter, which was great. But then when I got to the end of the 3rd scene, I realized that I still had an equally thick stack of paper in my hand, which were the next 3 scenes, which I had never seen. And rather than say, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't seen these yet, may I take a moment and take a look at these, I just felt like you got Jerry Seinfeld cracking up
Yeah.
You know, and another great thing that happened, which you hope for in auditions for characters like that, is I never spoke in my own voice. So at this moment, nobody in the room even knows I don't speak like that. And, you know, advice from a great, great old actress who's deceased now, Sherry North, to me once was, when you go into an audition and you're playing a character, don't ever let them know who you really are. Let them believe you are that character, because they don't have the imagination to make the adjustment, you know, once you come in and go like, hi, how you doing? And then launch into the evil killer, you know.
Wow.
So it was going so well, and I hadn't said a word. Nobody knew that I didn't really talk like that. So I just launched into the next 3 scenes, absolutely stone cold, picking the words up off the paper as I went. But I just made that decision, you know.
And then,
so,
go ahead.
Anyway, cut back to the set. So, you know, the part turned out to be a lot bigger than I thought it was, and I was nervous. You know, there were some really good character actors in that week who had smaller parts than I did. Yul Vasquez, who played the gay armoire thief with the Cuban accent,
right,
and John Paragon, who played the other armoire thief, who was Paul Rubin's writing partner for a really long time, and he was in Pee-wee's Playhouse and did specials with Paul Rubens on TV and stuff. So I knew these guys, and I was going like, wow, you know, not to mention all the Seinfeld people themselves. So I tried to stick really verbatim to the script, not make any mistakes, you know, be Mr. Perfect, except for one line that Spike had written where Elaine does the Al Pacino impression, and I answer her with "No soup for you, come back." And the way he had written it was "come back in 1 year." But I'm just like flying with this accent, you know. I mean, I've been told when I do accents that what did one producer say? You really play the accent, you know. And it becomes a character of itself, you know. Like,
right.
It's music to me, doing different accents. And so I'm, you know, flying through this accent, and somehow "come back in 1 year" just didn't fit. So I said, "Come back 1 year." And everybody on the set just fell and started laughing, you know. It was like the first rehearsal. And I don't know whether it was Andy Ackerman or Larry David, or someone said, "Keep that," you know. And so it became part of the lexicon, because half the times when I sign autographs and stuff, people ask me if I'll write "come back 1 year." So it's almost hard to write grammatically because, you know.
It doesn't sound, it doesn't, yeah, your ear and your eyes see it differently, hear it differently.
That was my single ad lib. Other than that, everything was exactly how Spike wrote it, you know. And then Larry David had a couple of adjustments to to my scenes after the audience left the night we shot it. He still, you know, in the mind of Larry David, it never turns off. He's always adjusting, you know.
Now, as funny as Seinfeld and David and the producers thought it was, there was someone there who didn't think this was one of their better episodes, right?
Right. Oh, my God, who later came back to haunt me again, actually. But
really?
Michael Richards hated this script so much that he spent the entire working week, because it's usually 4 days of rehearsal, or actually kind of 5 days of rehearsal, and on the 5th day you shoot it that night before the audience. But they cut off a day this week because it was in October during the Jewish holidays, and we only did 4 days and shot it on the 4th night. But all 4 days he was just bending anyone's ear that would hear him on how terrible a script this was. I don't know who I felt more sorry for, me or Spike. Not only was I, you know, on Seinfeld for the first time, but it was my first really major television guest spot after, you know, 15, 18 years of trying to get one. And so I had to listen to it, you know. And then Spike, of course, it was his first script for Seinfeld, so he had to listen to it. And it was just basically Andy Ackerman and Larry David and Jerry trying to assuage Michael Richards all week. Don't worry about it, don't worry about it. And he would keep, every time he had to do a scene, whether it was like the scene where he gets the armoire stolen, and then Elaine doesn't get his soup. And he gets really upset about it. He kept stopping in the middle of the rehearsal going, this doesn't make any sense to me. Why am I so upset? I lost a major piece of furniture here, and I didn't get a cup of soup. Why am I so upset? And Andy Ackerman would have to keep saying, but that's the joke, Michael. The soup is that good. And he'd go, that's what's wrong with this episode. It's an episode that doesn't make any sense. It's not based in reality. He was really actually very careful about his reality, even though, if you watch the show through all the 9 seasons, he did the most nonsensical. He had the most nonsensical reality of all.
Right.
But I guess from what I've heard, he used to have to be talked into a lot of it. And in this particular one, he just really had to be talked into it. And then actually came up to me a few times and would say, like, why is your character so mean? I don't understand it. I would be going like, I got cast, all right? I've already done that part of this job.
It's a job, Michael. It's keeping me in acting class a little longer.
Yeah, my audition explained the way I'm playing it. I don't need to change it, and I don't really need to explain it to anybody.
Now, you said that you had contact with him again later? There was another issue?
Well, not really. I never met him again. I did during the finale briefly.
Oh, okay.
I had him sign my Soup Nazi script, and he was very nice. But what I meant was in November of 2006, when Season 7 came out, Sony had a major publicity tour planned for me in New York and Toronto to make appearances and do radio interviews and television shows to promote Season 7. And that's the same day that the news broke about his problem he had at the Laugh Factory in L.A.
Right.
So little bit by bit, everywhere I went, every interview got canceled.
Oh, my.
Because nobody wanted to promote Seinfeld that day. That was the day, that it actually came out in the stores, So yeah, it was people that know me. And the story I just told you about Michael, I really don't tell very often because I don't want to put him in a bad light.
Sure.
He is an artist, and what he did with Kramer was pure genius. I still am amazed to this day. If you look at the development of the character through the show, it was comic genius. And so I don't have anything against him at all, but I'm afraid people will take that story out of context and think he was a bad guy, and I don't think he was. I think it was just part of his genius that he questioned everything.
Larry, did you do a commentary for the Season 7 DVD?
Yeah, there's a little bit of it on there. We sat there for 2 hours, but they used a little bit of it, but I really loved the bit they used. Out of everything we talked about, I loved the bit they used because I had told a story about sitting in the bleachers watching the Jerry's living room scenes develop, because that's the most rehearsal time is always spent in Jerry's living room, because if you ever watch any episode, those are really the longest scenes. Everything sort of develops and is rehashed and talked about there, and then they go out and like flashback or show it to you. But I would sit there in the bleachers, and we didn't rehearse the Soup Nazi stuff until the last day anyway, because they had to build the soup kitchen. But I would just sit there watching, not just me, a wonderful actor named Tom Barry, who was Elaine's building superintendent. He sat there with me. And we would just watch these guys rehearse and just, as actors, say, like, is this Eden or what? This is like paradise. These 4 incredibly talented, funny people take a really good script, have a really great director like Andy Ackerman, and they just get to spend each day hashing through it, working on it. And it was just so fabulous to watch. But one particular day, they were in Jerry's living room, and it was a scene in this episode where George and Elaine had decided to confront Jerry about how obnoxious his relationship was with Schmoopy, who was played by Ali Wentworth, who is now married to George Stephanopoulos, oddly enough. I had to throw that in there. But they were about to confront him, and Julia, Louis-Dreyfus, just off the cuff, just said, you know what, Andy? Wouldn't it be funny if just as George is sort of preparing to confront Jerry, I sort of got up and walked around the back of the couch and went to the front door, and just as George is about to go, isn't that right, Elaine? The door slams and I'm gone. And Andy just, you know, he was so relaxed. He was such a great director. He just goes, yeah, try it. And, you know, for me, this is like, wow. And, you know, I've done so much theater, and this is very much like theater. And I'm just going like, oh, my, wow. You know, and she does it. She just tries it. And Andy goes, yeah, you know, that works. Let's work it up, and we'll do it for Larry, because Larry David would have the last word on everything. And so they did. And Tom and I just got to sit there and watch, you know, just with our jaws open, like, what paradise that was. And they did it, and it's in the episode. It's one of the really funny moments.
Now, Larry, after the episode airs, what's the first sign you have that your life has changed forever?
I think later that night, I got a couple of calls from the East Coast, because I live on the West Coast. And I got a couple of calls from the East Coast saying, are you watching the news? And I said, why? And they said, because, you know, they keep airing scenes of you, or a scene of you from the Seinfeld that aired tonight. And they're comparing you to some real soup vendor in New York. And I didn't even know at that point there was a guy. I mean, I think I had been told on the set that it was based on somebody, but I didn't know to what extent. You know, I had never seen him or heard of him. And so I turned on the news, and sure enough, in every news report, every late news report, they would be airing this comparison between me and this guy, and there was like a still of me from the show and a still of him, and then they would show my scene, and it was just all, and that continued for the rest of the weekend, you know, all through the weekend. So I had a feeling at that point that this wasn't just any episode of Seinfeld. But I don't think I realized till years later just what place it would take in the sort of lexicon of what Seinfeld did to our society. You know, Christmas, when I hear people re-gifting, talking about re-gifting, and you go to a party and they're talking about double dipping, and you know, you have to stop and say, wow, you know, that show had such an effect. So yeah, I kind of began to realize that having played this character was going to change my career.
Now, you actually met Al Yagna, the inspiration for the Soup Nazi, right?
Yeah, it was a few years. The funny thing is, you know, is I never got to meet Al before any time I played the character, pretty much.
Right.
Like, you know, I played him the first time without ever having seen or heard Al, and then I did the second time as well, which was in the finale, which was in 1998, because mine was in 1995. So in 1999, I was in New York, and I got contacted by Extra and Inside Edition, and they wanted to have me go with them to his stand, and they were going to, like, interview him and introduce him to me and see how he'd react. So I did, and he was a very interesting character, Al. He really does get to raving and ranting quite a bit, especially if you bring up Jerry Seinfeld.
Which, of course, no one did.
Yeah, well, he hates Jerry. He thinks he equates the name Jerry Seinfeld with being called the Soup Nazi and every taste about it, where he doesn't really equate anybody else with it. Like, he doesn't know the entertainment business, so he doesn't realize that long before that episode, that was his nickname by the Letterman writers, you know, was the Soup Nazi, and
right.
He was already called that. But so Jerry's to blame for everything. So he ranted and raved about Jerry a little bit, and then when they said, like, well, this is the actor that played the character that was supposed to be you on the TV show, and, you know, what do you have to say to him? And he said something like, you know, He's an actor. He's a good actor, maybe. But he's not a chef. He does not make soup. He doesn't make soup like I do or something like that. I said, well, would you shake hands with him? And he said, yeah, of course. And stuck out his hand, and I shook his hand. And which I thought was really interesting, but unfortunately the two shows never aired any of that because they felt like it wasn't newsworthy that we shook hands. They felt like it only would have been newsworthy if we started screaming at each other. Which, I mean, you're a journalist. You know?
Yeah.
You got to cringe when you realize that journalism has come to that. But then years later, we were doing The Odd Couple in New York in 2002, and I went up to his place again and stuck my head into his little kitchen and reintroduced myself. And we actually had a conversation that time, and he once again complimented me on my work. He said he had seen one of the scenes on the Oprah show or something, and he thought I was funny. So we talked, and he actually gave me soup, which was delicious, by the way. I have to say that his seafood bisque was knee-buckling. It was really good. And so, yeah, I haven't seen him since then, but, I may be one of the few people in the world that has had a really good experience with Hal Yakin.
Now, Larry, actors on long-running TV series often fear, and rightly so, being forever labeled by a character. You achieved video immortality in just one episode, and I might add that most people think you were actually on more than one episode, the finale aside. Is it a pro or a con that you did this?
Well, in all this, I'd have to say it's a pro for me. The con part of it is not what you'd think, but the pro part of it is that, number one, at that point in my career, after 15 or 18 years of trying to get acting work and not being able to interest anybody in the world of like big time, what we call big time, film, TV. After that, everyone wanted to see me. Mike Myers wanted me to do a cameo in the first Austin Powers movie. Suddenly it was a little bit limiting what they wanted me to audition for. Mostly guys with dialects and kind of crazy, funny guys. But to be honest, I was suddenly auditioning for major television and built up quite a resume of guest spots on major TV shows. So I can't assume that I would have gotten there anyway without that, because it launched me like a shot in the arm from that one episode. I guess the con part of it, and I still get this to this day, is that, if you're Jason or if you're Julia or Michael, and yes, your career is seriously affected by 9 seasons of playing this character. I just heard that her new show may have been canceled, which I was enjoying a lot. The New Adventures of Old Christine. But the problem with them is the public doesn't want to accept them as any other character because they love them so much as that character. But at least they had the benefit of 9 years of really good pay to put money in the bank and to buy nice houses, and then they're major stars. So if they want to command a TV movie, or lend their name to a good script or a low-budget movie or whatever, they've got carte blanche in those areas. So there's a lot they have going for them, even though you want to feel sorry for them that their careers are kind of halted. But I don't have that benefit. I only did one episode. The pay was $2,600, and of course, after taxes and commissions and what have you, I was $50 shy of paying my mortgage that month with that check. And people think the residuals must be amazing, but what they don't realize is residuals are salary contingent, which means whoever was making the most money in that episode gets most of the residuals.
Yeah.
And it wasn't me. So my residuals, even for the DVD sales, has always been like not even gas money. So, in the end, I guess the con part of it is people treat me like I spent my career on that one part.
Right.
Sometimes, I've actually gotten nasty letters from fans who I get a lot of autograph requests, and I have to say to people sometimes, I can't afford the postage. So, send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, and I'll sign one of my headshots and send it to you. And also, I make part of my living, other than new acting work, selling a Soup Nazi photo that I signed that Castle Rock and I agreed that if I took this one picture, it could be mine, because they wouldn't let me use anything that they owned.
Right.
That was taken during the show. So I had this one photo commissioned of me in character. They okayed it. And on my website and eBay and at autograph shows, I sell that photo that I signed and autographed soup ladles that people tend to really get a kick out of. And so, sometimes I will say to a fan that's saying, like, hey, can I have a free picture of you as the Soup Nazi, whatever? And I'll say, well, I sell those. And sometimes I'll get a really nasty letter back that says, like, what did you do with your millions of dollars? I can't believe you're a millionaire and you want, and it's like, of course I was never a millionaire. I got less for doing that episode than most of the people that are yelling at me once a month for their job.
Now, you did an episode of Scrubs that kind of plays into this, and that was an accidental appearance. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I met the Scrubs writers, and I met Bill Lawrence in the hallway of where the writers' conference room was, and he said, oh, come in and meet the writers. And he's like, dragged me into the writers' room and, introduced me. And one of the writers said, say the soup thing. And so I just yelled, nothing for you. And all the writers were like stopped in the tracks of whatever they were doing. And one of the guys said, you don't mind that? And I said, oh my, I say it 20 times a day on the lean days, Everyone wants to hear that. And I'm yelling it into the phone all the time and into people's cell phones. Stop me on the street. And, they said, oh, wow, So the next day they called my manager and they said, we wrote a scene for Larry where J.D. is trying to get him to say no soup for you, and he won't, and all this stuff. So I got to shoot this great scene on Scrubs with Tara Reid and Zach Braff. I mean, it was just, all based on that.
And Tara Reid thought this was going to just remake your whole career, right?
Yeah. Well, there was, if anyone's ever seen the episode, basically, what happens is J.D. says, aren't you the Soup Nazi from Seinfeld? And I say no, and he goes, come on, say the soup thing, and I say no. And originally, what we shot was different. Originally, he says, aren't you the Soup Nazi from Seinfeld? And I say, no, I'm actually a classically trained actor who has played many other roles, and it's a little shallow to pigeonhole a guy in one TV guest spot he did over 8 years ago, don't you think? And then J.D. says, come on, say the soup thing. And I go, no, So actually there was this speech saying, like, yes, I'm the actor, but, whatever. And all through that day after we shot that, like over lunch and whatever, Tara Reid kept saying to me, because I think this is going to totally change your career. I think once, this episode airs and they see you saying that speech, they're going to realize that you are, a better actor than that and, whatever. But unfortunately for me, this is the life of an actor. Somewhere in editing, they decided to change the meaning of the scene from, no, I'm not only the Soup Nazi, to no, I'm not him. And so they had to cut that speech in order to get that meaning, which is just, aren't you the Soup Nazi from Seinfeld? No. Say the soup thing, no. And then later, in the scene, J.D. says, oh, he is so the Soup Nazi. And he tricks me into saying it. So they had to, and you have to live with that stuff,
You
just have to. You have to go on and live with the fact that I remember when I went to the screening of Austin Powers, and Jay Roach, who directed it, came up to me, and my scene wasn't very long, but I had one really funny line that we both loved, which was when Robert Wagner in his X-ray eye patch has 17 and he wants to hit, and I'm the blackjack dealer, and I say, you have 17, sir. And he knows he's already looked through the deck and he sees that the next card is a 4. But, I don't know that, so I say, you have 17, sir. And then I had this line where I said, the book says not to. And Jay and I both really liked that line that Mike Myers wrote. And I guess somewhere in editing, once again, Jay had to decide that the dealer shouldn't have any ridiculous dialogue, because what's funny about the scene is that this dealer is like a real solid Las Vegas dealer, and Austin Powers is absolutely ridiculous. So he came up to me before the screening, and he put his arm around me, and he took me into a corner, and he goes, listen, man, I got to warn you about something. And I said, what? He goes, I had to cut our favorite line.
Oh.
Because it made you funny as well. And he goes, I needed a straight man in that scene, because Austin Powers is this ridiculous thing in reality, and I had to make you reality. So I said, oh, well, whatever.
Now, it's interesting that as a sort of typecast as the Soup Nazi made you, your new movie coming out, Postal, which I think comes out in September, you play another character that people will equate to immediately. Can you tell us a little about that?
Notorious character.
Yeah.
I am really hoping that this one doesn't typecast me. I wouldn't mind being remembered for my performance in Postal, but I don't want to be typecast as this guy. I actually, in Postal, I play Osama bin Laden. But I have to qualify that by saying Postal is an extreme political and social comedy. And my Osama in this is very different from what your image of Osama bin Laden is, which is part of the comedy of Postal. It flips on its ear every idea we have of what we see politically and socially in both the United States, mostly the United States, and the world. So my Osama is comedically different from, the scary Osama that we know. So, but yeah, it's interesting that I didn't go through one day of shooting in 4 weeks on this movie and not have somebody, whether it was a driver or my makeup person or the costumer or somebody, say to me, aren't you worried that your life is going to be in danger when this movie gets released? And it's like, yeah. Now that you mention it, yes, I am.
How many actors can say that they played a Nazi and the leader of Al-Qaeda in one career?
I know, and a Jewish actor.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that. Are you Jewish?
Oh, you didn't? Yeah.
No.
I'm a Brooklyn Jew from Borough Park, Brooklyn.
Oh my goodness.
And my mother laughed her head off because you mentioned something about Arrested Development earlier.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And not only have I played a Nazi, Osama, well, not a real Nazi, but a person called a Nazi, Osama, but in Arrested Development, I was a Saddam Hussein lookalike in Iraq. So I've hit them all, really. I don't think there's anything much left
Wow.
that you can hit being Jewish.
Now, who else is in Postal? Because there's a lot of familiar faces in this movie.
Yeah, it's really going to be character driven. Dave Foley plays one of the lead characters in it. J.K. Simmons, who was J. Jonah Jameson in the Spider-Man movies, he's in it. Vern Troyer, who was Mini-Me in the Austin Powers movies, he's in it. David Huddleston, who has a really rich career from all the Mel Brooks movies, like, Blazing Saddles and many, many movies, he's in it. And Seymour Cassell has had a great career, he's in it. A lot of well-known character faces you'll see in Postal. And the lead is played by an actor named Zach Ward, who, although you might not recognize him as a grown-up, although from what I hear from Zach, his career is taking off like a shotgun right now. So you might be seeing Zach and other things even before Postal at this point. But Zach was in the movie A Christmas Story, which is like everybody's favorite Christmas movie these days.
Right.
He was the bully, Scott Farkas, who had yellow eyes. He had yellow eyes. That was Zach when he was, a kid. And he's the young leading man in the movie.
I think he also did a couple episodes of Deadwood.
Yeah. Like I said, lately I first met Zach about 2 years ago, just sort of coincidentally. And, so when I got cast in Postal and shot in Canada, when I went up there, waiting for me in my hotel room was a script, and in the script was the cast list, and I opened it up, and the first thing I see is, dude, Zach Ward. And I thought, oh, that's funny, How odd is that I know Zach? So I called him, and I just said, hey, man, we're in the same movie. And so, yeah, things have been really cooking for him, which is great.
Well, I think we'd all like to see things cook for you, Larry.
Thank you. Acting is like being an actor. Well, you could take it two ways. It's either a brotherhood or it's a competitive thing. And a lot of actors are very competitive, but I've never been able to look at it that way ever since I started doing this. To me, it's a brotherhood. And, I guess I can talk about it forever because many people don't understand what the life and the plight is of these people that you watch on TV or see in movies. It's just a particular job that doesn't really fit with most people's jobs. Even though it is just a job, but most people don't realize that most people go on a job interview, which is harrowing, and they get the job, and then they do that job for the next 30 years.
Right.
And they build a pension, and they, soon relax and think, wow, I have a great job, or I like my job, or even if I don't like my job, it's still a job. But they don't realize that we go through that same interview, 2-3 times a week for the rest of our lives. And it's tough. It never gets any easier. It's that same interview where,
right.
You walk into a room, you're unemployed, and everybody else is employed. It's still a strange feeling, even though I've done it hundreds of times.
Well, Larry, good luck on Postal, and thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media this week.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
And, yeah, look for Postal on September 28th.
Okay.
And visit my website, which is soupnazi.tv.
All right, and we'll have that linked on the site. And, folks, if you'd like to keep up with Mr. Media's Friday interviews, you can subscribe to the site via email at www.mrmedia.com. You can also subscribe to the audio feed in the podcast section of iTunes. Thanks for joining us. Please come back next week for another Fridays with Mr. Media.